worst, he did this during an interview. I thought it was the worst interview by a professional politician in the history of our country. Because Gavin, I think, is when he says he's stupid. He said he's stupid, but remember? But he said he's smarter than the people in the room. And then he got sued for being a racist, okay? And I guess he probably is a racist, but he said he was a stupid person. You'll never hear me call myself I'm the smartest guy you're ever gonna meet. And don't you want to have a smart person as president? Yeah, you want to have a smart person. In fact, I took the cognitive test. I'm the only one. You know, they called me, originally they said, he's brilliant. He wants to take over the entire country. Then they said, no. He wants the world. He doesn't want the country. That's why he's in Iran. That's why he's in, hey, by the way, how did we do in Venezuela? Not bad. That's why he's in. You know, we've taken out so much oil in Venezuela, we paid for the cost of the war about 25 times over. When did you hear that last? You know, it's a one-way street. But no, the doctor, I said, doctor, let me ask you a question. They called me genius, and that didn't work. Then they said he's totally brilliant. He's a vicious dictator who wants to take over. That didn't work. And then they called me this, and then they said, they hit me with a bad one. He's a dumb person. D-U-M, not the B. He's a dumb person. It's enough. Most people don't know it has a B. He's a dumb person. I said, doctor, I don't mind being called a brilliant, total tyrant dictator, but I don't want to be called dumb. What do I do, doctor? Is there some kind of a test I can take? He said, actually, sir, there is. It's a cognitive test. I said, how many presidents have taken it? None. You know this story. No people have taken it. I said, well, is it good or bad? Is it tough? It's a tough test. It starts off easy. It gets very, very tough. I said, well, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take that test, I think, doctor, because I do good on tests. I'm going to take that test, and let's see how we do. He said, here's the problem, sir. If you do badly on the test, it's going to be reported because there's Walter Reed Medical Hospital. It's a military hospital. It's sort of public. So you have 5 doctors sitting there, and they're all, if you do badly on it, sir, and you could do badly, because, you know, the questions are very easy at the beginning, then pretty easy, then pretty hard. By the time you get to the end, there are not a lot of people in the room can get them, believe me. I said, well, it will be public, won't it? It'll be embarrassment, but let's do it. This was in my first term. I took it, and I aced it. And they had tough questions. So the first question was, you have a bear, a snake, an elephant, and a horse. Name the horse. That's the horse. The second question's a little tough, and then he goes, so the New York Times does a story to show the test that I just aced, and they only used the first question. They didn't go into the other questions. They didn't go in. But toward the end, like they had a question like, pick a number, sir, any number. Okay, 203. Multiply times 9. Divide by 2. Add on 1,324. Subtract 1,292. Sir, multiply it out one more time by 19. What is the answer, sir? And I got it right. You know? And the one doctor said, I've been doing this test for 20 years. I've never seen anybody ace it. So then what happened? That was in my first term. And that quieted people down. That was good. And then what happened? I did it twice in my second term. So I've taken it, and I've aced it all 3 times, I'll tell you. Because it is a positive thing, you know, positive. Nice to be smart. But remember, I said, and I made the statement, all presidents and vice presidential candidates should be forced to take a cognitive test and a test on intelligence. And I said it loud. Obama couldn't do well on it. Biden wouldn't even get the first question. I don't think he'd get the first. Which is the bear? Which is the horse? No, would he get? You know, I have a friend, he's very good politically, but he has a test. He owns, like, stores, little stores. He's not super rich. In fact, he's not even rich. But he makes a living, as he expresses. He goes, but I knew him a long time. I like to keep my old friends. I like to do really much better than them. I don't like friends that become very successful. I like people that are just okay. Even if they're terrible, I like that too. I hate, like when I have lunch with somebody that's really, really successful, I hate it. Because he or she is bragging about how great they are, and I hate that when they do that. Because they stop me from talking about the fact that I became president. But I have a friend, and he said, you know, I have a simple test for a politician. I own stores. I'm really good at it. It's not a complex business. And I say, how would a president do running my store while I'm away on vacation? He said, I take one store, not 3 or 4. And I say, my busiest one Queens Boulevard, Queens. He said, I take a store, and I say, how would he be? And I said, so what's the answer? He said, you would drive it into one of the largest retail empires in the world. Biden wouldn't be able to run the store for one evening. One evening it would be a disaster. He said, I give people tests. I put people in my store. I say, how do you think they do? And he said, Biden wouldn't be able to run a store. We can never let that happen again to our country. We can never let it happen again. What he's done to our country is unacceptable. And a lot of bad things. We had inflation, but we've got that down. By the way, the oil prices are going to tumble as soon as I finish up with Iran. Tumble. I was in Iowa. We had it down to $1.85 a gallon in Iowa, but we had it down around the $2 point. And then I said, well, Lutnick, we're going to have to take a trip to, we got Scott Bessent, we got all of them. I said, we just hit 50,000 on the Dow, and I said, that's a record, highest ever. I said, sorry to do this to you, but we're going to have to journey down to the Middle East. They said, why? I said, because Iran is going to have a nuclear weapon if we don't stop them. And I said, we're going to have to do it, and we have stopped them.